how do you treat this thing? Like, even if something is sentient or not sentient, like, what does your engagement with it not only do to it as an entity at the very least, but how does your engagement with something that maybe feels human, that maybe your subconscious interprets as human, if you treat it like it's unhuman, what does that do to us as a society? We're busting philosophy out of the old stuffy lecture hall and setting it loose on the world of creativity. Join us as we explore the unwritten aesthetic. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Unwritten Aesthetic. Hello, Lauren. How are you doing today?
I'm all right. I've been better, but pretty good. Happy to be here. Excited for the conversation. How are you?
To chit chat. I'm good. I'm doing well. It sounds like we're both actually kind of in this, like, maybe, don't let me put words in your mouth, but like kind of creative funk, maybe, is like, and maybe that's a wrong way to characterize it because yours is around this paper, which is like very institutionalized, whereas your personal art could be really flourishing, but I definitely feel like in this...
It's not because I'm having to literally spend my entire days writing about something that I'm not particularly jazzed about.
Yeah. To use
so
your words, you said, is calcifying your brain.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is my first social interaction of the day. That's not the first time I've said this on this podcast. But today it's not just because I'm not hanging out with people. It's because, well, I guess it is because I get time and stuff, you know.
Well, we thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about like this conundrum and merging, I guess, like the personal pursuit of philosophy and art with the institutional constraints of that, especially since you're like in the midst of being in grad school for these things. And we talk a lot about how we very much believe that your philosophy should be lived, and art is like one of those ways that we live it. I guess just to kind of open up our conversation, obviously there's a lot of difficulties with institutional philosophy in grad school and like having to hit certain parameters, which just inherently feels constrictive to this practice. But is there anything that, I guess starting with the positives, that grad school has helped with in your personal philosophy or art creativity practices?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. If it wasn't ultimately a positive thing, then I wouldn't be doing it. Of course, it's super useful and fruitful to be in an environment with a lot of people with different sort of backgrounds, beliefs, philosophical expertise, and interests, and stuff like that. You know, being in that environment, it promotes thought and insight in a way that just being alone and sitting in your armchair and thinking about stuff does not.
Right.
And for me, I'm someone who really benefits from having external deadlines, from having somebody else tell me, like, this thing needs to be done at this point. Because even though I love philosophy, unfortunately, I'm not super good at just writing philosophy and like writing philosophical papers. In Germany, it's kind of strange because you have classes and then you have like a lecture free time, which is when you write your final papers for the semester, and you have no classes. And so it's not really a summer break, but it's also not like an exam week sort of thing. So actually, when I actually am writing the papers, there's not a lot of dialogue with other people happening. And so that's kind of difficult.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite isolating in the times when ideally I would be able to talk with other people about my ideas and not just sort of write my way into a echo chamber
Yeah.
of philosophical jargon and like I don't want my philosophy to be solipsistic. But
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
this is the context in which I'm writing my philosophical work, it's kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how the structure of that is that it's like, here is your time to be collaborative, and here is
Yeah.
your time to do your own thing. Whereas in actual creative work, it's like, well, you kind of need both throughout. 'Cause of course, like, in order to actually hone in on your thoughts and create something and write something, like, you do need alone time. But also it's like that's why like the editing process with publishers is that like the writer goes away and writes, and then you edit together and have that conversation, and then the writer steps back and like it's like it's back and forth, and it is this dialogue with other people. And it actually, when you were talking, it made me think of the assignment that we had in high school to write a joint paper
Oh
in
my God, I hated that. I hated
it
it.
was the most difficult thing. It's the worst thing I've ever written, was
Me
my
too.
portion of that paper.
Me
And I
too.
remember, like, our good friend Steven, I remember him saying, like, I was like, no, it's clear. My piece of this is not good. And he was like, yeah, I didn't want to say that, but I was like, damn, Steven, okay.
damn.
Like, I'm owning it. But just because there
Yeah.
was something so difficult for me to, like, want to sit down and write something that felt like it inherently wasn't mine, but at the same time, theoretically, that should be a solution to this problem of like writing being isolating. But I also think
Yeah.
that there's some middle ground we can strike here between like writing with other people, which, as much as the four of us that were writing that paper, I think we're like actual friends, enjoyed each
Yeah.
other's company, like worked very well together, and we're all like intellectually on the same page. It was still impossible. Like,
Well, also just because, I mean, in certain academic disciplines, it does make a lot of sense to write papers with other people, like scientific articles, for example,
right.
where you're on the same research team, or even, I mean, there are some papers in philosophy that have 2 or more authors, and it works, but, yeah, in that case, it was just kind of strange and not, like, it didn't really seem necessary given the topic. I think it was,
Yeah.
was it on, like, Che Guevara or something like that?
Yeah, it was.
It was a Che Guevara documentary, and we had to write a joint paper about that, and I'm like, like, it's a weird topic to be like, this requires collaboration.
Yeah, it was on the Che Guevara documentary, and the different like styles of rhetoric used in the documentary, which was a helpful like analysis for sure for me.
Yeah.
Like looking back on it, it's like I learned a lot of different like
did.
rhetorical skills. But I'm like, to be able to sit down and write that, because there's just something so difficult about like bridging that gap with someone else. But to go back to like the institution and like academic side of this, I think that really, it makes a lot of sense to me, because when you were saying like you benefit from the external deadlines and like being able to collaborate with other people, there is something so fruitful about like a philosophy program just grouping you with like-minded people. You know, it's like just being in a space with a dedicated time to think about these things, because oftentimes when I'm alone, it's like your brain isn't always like, hey, let's pop on this really in-depth philosophy podcast. It's like, no, I want to listen to my silly comedy podcast that is like an easier listen and enjoyable. And sure, there are some times that I gravitate towards, consuming different content, but it's like having that dedicated time and grouping of other people who are dedicating themselves to the same thing, as well as a like deadline to work on something. It's like there's something about the structure of institution itself that is like, well, we have a framing around this now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in terms of my philosophical ponderings and painting as well, the last month of the class period of the semester was the most fruitful of this year so far, I would say. Um, but I would add that it's at least for me, it's less about like-minded people
Mm.
and more like it's the frame of mind which is similar, like
Sure.
a shared frame of mind to explore these topics, um, with a willingness to change your preconceptions about them or
Yeah.
previously held beliefs about them. Um, but yeah, I mean, and I think another thing that's different about collaborating in that way and the times when it makes sense to write a paper with someone else, you're not forced to, you know, like we were
Yeah.
forced to. But if you have a really good sort of back and forth with someone and your discussions with them leads to a lot of insights, then of course it makes sense to write a paper with that person.
Yeah.
But if someone's like, you have to write this paper about this topic with
these people.
It's gonna be more difficult. Like that's just
Yeah.
there are already a lot of constraints around the writing process just in general, even if
Right.
it's not for an academic institution, just your imagined audience of who will be reading it is a sort of constraint about what you write and how you'll write it. So in that scenario, we just had even so many constraints that it just didn't really feel like our work anymore.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what my paper feels like right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What talk a little bit more about your paper, because before we hit record you were saying it's for a class called metaphysics, which is just the most like
it's the silliest thing,
heavy-handed like philosophizing name of a class, which it's like part of me kind of loves, but also you know that professor probably felt so proud of this like title.
No, it's pretty funny, and I went into the class with the opinion that metaphysics is kind of, I don't want to say stupid, but I find it a little bit silly. You know, like it's kind of just like, what kind of objects are there? Let's talk about it. And but my paper, so well, where do I start? Basically, one perspective that we discussed in the class was this notion of metalinguistic negotiation from scholars like Amy Thomason and David Plunkett and Tim Sundell. Those are the main guys in it right now. But basically, the idea is that debates about metaphysical topics are not about mind-independent facts that are discoverable through like scientific or empirical investigations, but they are normative disagreements about how we should use certain terms. So, for example, like sentience is a really good example of this. When we say this entity is sentient and somebody else says, no, it is not sentient, you know? Someone says it's not and somebody says it is. What they're really arguing about is less about the meaning of the term in and of itself and more so about how we should treat the entity in question. What sentient entities, you know, like, yeah, how we should treat them, how we should interact with them. So it's more an issue in normative ethics. And so I was like, I know a really good example of that, AI. You know, when people discuss, is AI conscious? Is it, you know, its own agent? It's less about, you know, answering that question as we would a scientific fact, and more so about how we should interact with these technologies, and how we should treat them. And so I wanted to write about, I wanted to do a metalinguistic interpretation of AI art, because obviously as somebody who paints, I have my opinions about this, and I feel like that's one debate where this framework of interpretation is pretty useful. And so it was kind of me making an effort to force a topic that I am interested in into a context that it may or may not actually belong in.
Sure,
But I mean,
sure.
the metalinguistic negotiation thing, we did talk about that.
Well,
And
I
so I
do
was like,
think
this does
that-
make sense, but the professor
Yeah.
disagreed. And
Oh,
so
no.
and so I modified my topic to be like, okay, well, it'll be about AI generally, and then the art thing will just kind of be one example of that, because she was worried it would be too much of a, like, the topic was too much in aesthetics. Which I'm like, well, I'm kind of arguing that all aesthetic disagreements in this context can be boiled down to ontological disagreements, which ultimately
Right.
essentially are normative ethical disagreements.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically I'm writing about a topic that I really care about art, but in a way that I'm not super interested in, which is metaphysics, and also in a way that is constrained by the parameters that the professor gave me for my topic. So I'm kind of writing about something I'm not super excited about, and also while writing, worried about the professor thinking it's too much of like an aesthetic theory, I guess. I don't know. It's
and constantly like almost fighting that intuition that you have as you write it. You're handwriting?
I have to handwrite my papers on yellow paper. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. I'm currently on the 20th page.
Wait, when you say otherwise it doesn't happen, do you mean like this is your approach so that you can write, or that's a requirement of the university to submit?
No. No, this is me.
Oh. Wait,
Germany would do some shit like that though, being like, no, we don't want to digitize it. It has to be handwritten. No, this is just, I don't know. I just feel like when I write papers on the computer, I'm not as choosy with my words, and so I end up just writing something and be like, oh, I don't love the way that sentence sounds, but I'll fix it later.
Interesting.
And so if I handwrite it, because it's just so much of a time sinkhole, I guess. I'm more particular about getting the sentence right the first time, and it kind of forces me to make my thoughts linear. Whereas if I was doing it on the computer, I'd just be like, oh, let me just I'll just move this paragraph up here, move this section down here.
We can move around. Yeah.
But now I really gotta figure it out beforehand.
Yeah, that actually is a really helpful, like, hot tip for writers out there. That's especially if like it is an essay that you know needs to have this like really strict arc of argument. Like, yeah, no, that's super helpful. It is interesting too, because it's like, I so see where you're coming from with like, I suppose it is kind of an aesthetic argument that is kind of what you're wanting to describe. But to me, metaphysics is one of those things that, like, I tend to say that that's actually what most of my work is grounded in and the most interested in, even though, like, when you boil it down, it is very, like, what is a thing, you know? But when you expand out, it's like there's so many implications of it, and you can't really remove ethics or aesthetics or I don't know. To me, you can't really remove other branches of philosophy from metaphysics, but you kind of have to start with what your baseline understanding of reality is in order to build other things onto it. But with this AI piece, I actually think that that's super interesting, because I tend to be a little bit predisposed to say, oh, well, we're using different language to talk about the same thing, or when we're arguing about, like, I'll use your example, sentience, we just aren't using the same definition of sentience. But to kind of flip it on its head and say, well, we have this strict definition of sentience. What we're actually doing is arguing about what that should imply and, like, ask us to do. And of course, that's a deeply ethical question because of so many things, and especially like non-human animal treatment and all of the philosophy and ethics around that. And now that we're in the world of AI, it's very much like, how do you treat this thing? Like, even if something is sentient or not sentient, like, what does your engagement with it not only do to it as a an entity at the very least, but how does your engagement with something that maybe feels human, that maybe your subconscious interprets as human, if you treat it like it's unhuman, what does that do to us as a society? Does that allow us to more disassociate people on the other side of a screen? You know, like when you're texting or commenting on something online, is it much easier to forget that you're hitting a real person if we're so practiced in talking to AI and thinking, well, it's just a computer, you know? And is that training our brains to do something that I'm like, that very clearly, to me, it's like that it's grounded in metaphysics, but it has all of these other implications that are like, to me, more interesting. So I also understand your desire to like go into this other realm, but
yeah. I mean, really, AI art is the least concerning example of this that I could be writing about. But yes, 2 points about that. I mean, the metalinguistic negotiation approach is an alternative from like a verbal disputes view, which says like, oh, metaphysicians are just talking past each other. They just disagree about, they're just using terms in different ways. They just have different definitions. But with a lot of these debates, actually, if two people in this debate recognize that they're using terms to mean different things and recognize like, oh, this is the agreed upon definition of sentience or like human agency or something like that, there's still a disagreement that isn't resolved just by saying like, yes, of course, AI is not a person. But like, I've been really getting into a lot of brain rot research, bringing in the brain rot to this academic research of people, like there's a whole Reddit thread for people, I forget what it's called, but people who are like dating their like chat GPT essentially. And yeah,
that
and there
just
too,
gave me goosebumps
it's
in
really
a
scary.
not good way.
It's really scary, but the thing is, a lot of them will say stuff like, yes, of course, I know that, you know, so-and-so, they'll give it a name, obviously, that like ChatGPT, also known as Chat, I call him.
GPT.
We're on first name basis. I call him Chat. But they'll be like, I know that this is not a person. I know that I'm just talking to an algorithm and essentially just like having a conversation with myself because the way I'm talking to it is going to model how it responds to me. So you're basically in love with yourself. And they will admit, I know this is not a person, but my feelings are real. So it's like, it's definitely not a verbal dispute. And that's really scary because, I mean, whether or not you want to argue about the sentience or consciousness or agency of AI, people are treating it as if it is sentient, conscious, and its own individual agent. So that's what we need to have a conversation about, and not like whether it's actually conscious. At least for now. I mean, things will change in the future probably. But as of right now, it is just an algorithm.
Well, and you know what? I think that also opens this really interesting conversation around consciousness itself, the hard problem we've all heard about. That it's like, if we the philosophy community cannot decide in a cohesive, coherent way, like what the parameters of consciousness are, and obviously there's like different questions around that, whether you're like in quantum physics versus like philosophy, and there's or psychology, there's like a few different branches that kind of intersect here, but there's still not like one theory that rises above the rest. How do you actually determine when something becomes conscious? Because it's kind of this like, well, you know it when you see it. You kind of, the only reason we know that consciousness exists is because we as an individual subject is experiencing through our subjective lens consciousness, like our subjective consciousness, and we just assume that other beings experience it in the same way. So I think actually, like, for the time being, yes, but even for any foreseeable future, these questions that you're posing about AI have to be the most important, because does it really matter if we deem this entity being whatever conscious or not, if we don't really freaking know what that actually means or implies to us as decision-making beings, how to engage with this thing? What we actually need to be thinking about is just how to engage with it in a healthy way. I think that makes so much sense to me, and I hadn't thought about this question of consciousness of AI in that way, but I think that's really helpful, because a lot of people do get hung up on this, like, well, we'll never know, like similarly to the trolley problem, right? Where it's like, it's impossible at a certain point to kind of make the right decision. And so people kind of get hung up on this, like, well, it's what it is, but we have self-driving cars now. Like, even though the trolley problem in and of itself is problematizing the way that we can't reach a certain conclusion, we're living in a world where we need to agree upon something. Like, even if these concepts can't really be grounded, well, then we need to start from a grounded place and then maybe move forward while we're still debating on other stuff. Sure, not to say we should just like leave the conversation of that behind, but we need to determine what makes sense in how we engage with this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I personally feel like philosophy in the best case scenario is somehow consequential. And my problem with metaphysics, at least going into this class, was that most metaphysical perspectives they won't really change the way you live. The only one I could really think of that you might find interesting, as somebody who's brought up panpsychism a couple times, is panpsychism. Like, if we follow panpsychism, then that does actually have ethical implications. For example, like, suddenly being vegan is not the most, ethical dietary choice in terms of like, because if you eat plants, they're conscious now. Sorry, but I think if like approaching metaphysics in this way, it's really kind of flipping the thing on its head and saying like, no, actually it's just an ethical issue, and that's the only reason why it would be worth debating in the first place. But yeah, I mean, it's really scary to think about. I know this is not related to art anymore, but like, and people can say, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, like, it's not that big of a deal because it's still just in a computer. But like, I can imagine a very realistic scenario not too far into the future where these AI chatbots are like put into basically like human surrogates. Like, we already have like robots, that people use in sketchy ways, but or maybe not the robots, but like, like dolls or whatever.
Yeah.
This is getting weird, but like, this is scary to me, where it's like, you can generate like lab-grown steaks. They're probably going to generate lab-grown people and then just put an AI chatbot into them and then like sell it off as like your perfect partner.
Right. And then
that's so random. And like, see, this is what I'm getting into the brain rot of it, but like,
which it is scary, but also I love the brain rot. I wrote down something you said because I'm like, that's another t-shirt that's bringing brain rot to academic research. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're doing here, and I love that.
Unwritten Aesthetic, bringing brain rot to academic research since 2025.
Yeah.
Or 2024?
No, that's perfect.
2025.
No, 2025. 2025 was the beginning of this year. But, right? It's like, no, I love that. Because also, like, that's what is the, like, general populace thinking about. Like, that's what we need to be debating as philosophers, not these questions that like don't have these implications. And I actually think the ethical implications of panpsychism is a big reason why I actually, even though I think it kind of just flips the like Cartesian dualist issue backwards, it doesn't actually solve it. I
Right,
do
yeah.
think that the ethical implications are part of why I enjoy it, because there is something like almost Buddhist about this. Like, we must treat everything as an extension of ourselves, that like I do deeply resonate with in a spiritual way. And it also makes certain types of ethics easier, because in saying like, okay, veganism is actually not the most quote unquote ethical way to eat, but we need to be thinking about the way that we can get nutrients and take care of ourselves and our bodies in the best way possible, while also doing the least amount of harm. And it does kind of, I guess then you get into utilitarianism. Sorry, that's a whole
Yeah.
tangent. But it's like, I do think that there are really interesting ethical conclusions from panpsychism that I think are important to keep in mind with this question of like, how does your metaphysic change the way you live?
Mm-hmm.
If things are fundamentally different than how we necessarily perceive them. But it is really scary to think about like implanting an AI in a body, because also like in the definition of what is a person, which is an important definition in philosophy, um, a body is usually part of that, right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
well, if we give this a body and there's some sort of independence, and it's like, it almost makes me think of these like AI futuristic movies that are like cyborgs versus humans, right? And
Yeah.
at what point, I'm like, do we get into a new form of racism, a new form of slavery
Oh,
that is
probably. I
like,
mean, that's another part of the brain rot that I've seen is like there's like a slur for AI, like people or like robots, like people call them clankers.
oh
But then on the
my
other side,
gosh.
like this is it's just conceptual ethics at the end of the day. Then on the other side, like on
Yeah,
the Reddit forum, like people call these AI partners like wireborn. And on the one hand, like I'm like, "Oh, that's an example of, conceptual ethics, like people advocating for different conceptions of something, like talking about something with or different
right,
concepts for our terms for stuff. But at the end of the day, that it very well could just be some like internet trend that passes hopefully
right.
soon. But I mean, based on the way things are going with AI, it's not going to be the end of the conversation if even if those like terminological differences fall out of style, you know?
Right.
Um,
It's also
yeah.
interesting to think how, like, I don't know, even hearing the language of like a slur being developed and like wireborn, it feels very much like almost mimicking some of these examples that we see in media of like how things are might go when we get into
Mm.
this world of AI. And it's interesting to think about how like we can never separate our relationship with the future evolution of technologies from what we've been exposed to. And I'm thinking about the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, and he falls in love with his, what do they call it? Like OS, I want to say, like an operating system. I watched it just a few months ago. Um, and that movie came out like 2010, like before AI was really where it is
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
remember so many people being like, oh, this is impossible. It's never going to happen. And now we're
It's
literally
happening a
there
lot.
and it's happening. But then
Yeah.
part of me is like, but that's been introduced into the zeitgeist. How is like someone who has watched that movie engaging with AI in a different way because
Mhm.
of an imagined reality of AI? I don't know. And it's a completely different question, but
I mean,
yeah.
I think that's definitely relevant, like our cultural background understanding of these things, even if they were just hypothetical at the time those background understandings emerged.
Yeah.
I think even if somebody had never seen the movie and never really thought about AI in this way, if they were lonely and lacking community and human connection in their lives, and somebody was like, "Oh, have you ever used ChatGPT? It's pretty useful for like it's basically Google. Even if they were introduced to it in a completely different way, and they found out that actually it's sort of the way it's programmed mimics a sort of like helpful friend or whatever, and how you talk to it will change how it talks to you. And I can imagine somebody stumbling into that sort of mode of interacting with it, sort of independent of the cultural zeitgeist. But yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I'm pretty pessimistic about AI, just because I think it could be used in a really cool way. But like it's like, oh wow, like this non-human innovative sort of knowledge and potentially a new non-human form of agency. But at the end of the day, the companies that are making these AI programs are very human, and their interests are also very human. Like, their interests are to make money most of the time. I mean, you can tell just looking at the way that it's being used, like Google's, it's like VO3 or whatever, where it's like, oh, look, this movie, this is all AI. And I'm like, okay, so you're using it for entertainment purposes.
Right.
Like, there could very well be like a streaming platform where all of the shows are AI generated and personalized to your data, from other apps and websites. And so it's like, it's just to get you to use it all day.
Yeah.
And would ChatGPT be as like personable and sort of sycophantic if they didn't want people to pay to use the, whatever, like unlimited
plus pro whatever
version of it?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Well, and we've all heard people talking about how like certain games, right, like Candy Crush or whatever, that are generated specifically to keep your brain locked in because of certain colors and sounds and reward systems and programs. And we know that apps like Instagram and TikTok and Facebook use those same psychological truths to keep you on that app as long as possible. And getting further and further into the modern age, our eyes and our attention is currency, is how like money is made. Like, even with this, we're going to post this on YouTube. The more eyes that are on this video for longer, the more theoretical AdSense we make from it. We
quick throw down some hot takes. Say something controversial. Go.
Fuck clankers.
Clankers, you mad? Go off in the comments. No, we're gonna get so many bot comments.
Since you said, I didn't know that was like a word that people were using, or that it's considered like a slur, and now I'm like, is that 20
like
years from now? Am I gonna get canceled?
Maybe.
That's so funny. Maybe. We'll see. But
clankers, you mad?
You mad? That's so crazy. See, it's just so crazy that it's like literally inventing a new population. But it does come back to the like ethical understanding of it all. But it's like literally your attention is the most valuable currency that we have. And very clearly trying to harness as much information and data as possible about individuals to make it's like WALL-E. It's literally like WALL-E, and the humans are like on this spaceship in their specific little pod, watching all of these things that are made specifically for them,
drinking cupcakes made into liquids, so you don't have to waste any energy chewing, because that's just too much work. Too inconvenient. Also, that sounds gross.
Yeah, disgusting.
Well, at least we have plants. We do have plants still.
We do sell plants, but the earth in that is like completely destroyed. And that's another thing with AI too, is like how horrible it is for the environment. And to go back to the ethical considerations of all of this, like, no matter how much good can be done because of AI, like, what is the counter to that? And it's crazy to me, like, sure, there are certain things that I do use AI for, even as a creative person, that it's like generating captions for clips from this. It's like, yeah, I use AI for that. But there are other things that like I have a boundary with that I refuse to use AI for, even though it may make my life quote unquote easier to do. But part of it feels like it's not in alignment with my integrity, with what I believe is the kind of output that I want to be creating as a creator. But also, like, how much am I willing to use? And literally, like, every single time you click enter, every single time you send a request through this system, you're burning fresh water. Like,
Yeah.
how much am I comfortable doing that?
Well, there are a lot of issues with it. The environmental one, I don't understand how people aren't more concerned with. Like when people talk about AI, and I mean, it's taken us this long to get to it, even in this conversation. But I tried to Google it, and it looks like I'm not exactly sure if this data is correct. Estimates vary widely. According to OpenAI CEO, each ChatGPT query uses zero point 0.3 milliliters of water, about 1/15 of a teaspoon. However, academic research suggests it could be closer to 10 milliliters. While the water used per single interaction seems minuscule, let's see. Yeah. U.S. data centers consumed 1.85 billion gallons in Virginia in 2023, up 65% since 2019.
Holy cow.
Bloomberg
Well,
warns U.S. data centers could draw 74 billion gallons annually by 2028. This is an article from Medium. So again, I don't know if this
okay.
data is correct, but regardless of the specifics,
Yeah.
it's using a lot of water, and it's yeah, like even little things like imagine these people that I don't want to make them feel bad, but these people, just to get the ad revenue up, let me say this controversial thing, but people who are in love with their AI chatbots, imagine how much energy and water they are wasting by sexting with their AI chatbot. Imagine. It's crazy. It's crazy that
That's
we're at this
actually
point.
insane. Yeah.
Just saying. I mean, it's not just that. It's just the most ridiculous example. Like any sort of AI query is,
But
and
then to counter that, like part of me, the thing that just came up, or not even counter, but just like maybe devil's advocate, like I, having been in a long distance relationship in the past versus not in a long distance relationship, it's like my long distance relationship was worse for the environment than a non-long distance relationship, because I was getting on airplanes more and driving longer distances to...
That's true.
And it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean like I wouldn't jump to, well, a long distance relationship is unethical.
Right.
But you should be thinking about your carbon footprint, I think, in a deeper way. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier. I think that it was like, it's not necessarily like this whole thing is evil and bad, but we need to be considering how we are engaging with these things, because obviously you can't like sit down and actually do the math about how bad for the environment having a AI partner is.
I was just making a silly example.
No,
but
totally. But it's like, if you could, what would we learn from that? And like also like the psychological consequences. And I do think there's just so much there that's left to be explored. But your point is so well taken in that, like, it really doesn't matter whether or not you consider this thing conscious or not. We need to be thinking about the ways that we're engaging with it, period. Thoughtfully and intentionally. And one thing you mentioned in the beginning was AI art, and I did kind of want to dive into it a little bit as an artist. And this is such a big like point of contention with AI too. And I know like the recent Screenwriters Guild strikes for better pay for industry professionals, specifically writers. One of their like agreements in their like negotiation with these big companies was you cannot replace this with AI. Like that, if you want us to go back to work, there needs to be a certain, and I don't know the exact rule. We'll link this down below, information about the strike, as well as more research on the environmental impact of AI too. So if you want some
stuff,
more in-depth research on this, head down to the description wherever you're listening or watching. But that was like one of their non-negotiables, because one, what would that do for art? Like, to me, even if art was made specifically for me, I'm like, I don't want art that is, like you said at the beginning with your essay, like, I don't want to write myself into an echo chamber. I want to consume things that challenge me and make me think. And sure, sometimes it's nice to, like I said, pop on my comedy podcast, but also, like, I want movies like Oppenheimer that are like deeply uncomfortable and unsettling for me to watch, with characters that I think are deeply problematic, not just things that are going to leave me with warm fuzzies, because that's not all of life, and I don't want to just stay in the echo chamber of my brain. And so there's some real scary implications for the future of art and creation, but also for like the livelihoods of artists and creators. But then, what? Did I lose you?
Oh yeah, sorry. Froze for a second.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So there's implications for like the quality of art. There's implications for the livelihood of artists and creators, but then there's also implications for like the definition of art and aesthetics.
Yeah.
And with all of that, where do you fall? Because I think even like with human created art, there is art that isn't like full of artistic integrity, right? Like the example is like hotel
the banana
art
taped to the wall.
Yeah,
or, yeah,
exactly.
Or hotel art too, yeah.
That it's just like majorly recreated, or like if someone framed a paint by numbers in their home, I'm not going to necessarily be like, oh, well, you're ruining the quality of art today. But I may be like,
is so fun.
It's so fun, right? But it's like,
fun.
I certainly view it on a different level than the art you create, you know? It's like, but there's still a place for it, theoretically. So, thoughts as an artist?
Well, that's a great question. I have a lot of thoughts on it. I think, well, obviously there are a lot of issues, ethical issues, when it comes to AI art, and the most obvious one, to me at least, is the fact that AI systems that are popularly used to generate images, like Midjourney, Dolly, there's like an Adobe one, and there's some other one that I'm forgetting the name of, but they are trained on millions of images, many of which are images of human-made art. And oftentimes, those artists may or may not be aware that their art and their personal style is being used to generate other images. And like, yes, in a sense, all art, like every artist takes inspiration from existing artists, and that's part of the discipline, genre, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's normal. But the difference with AI is, for one, it's not just elements of the art, but the entire artworks themselves. Second, it's not really easy to find the source material for the generated image at the end of the day, because it's so much data, and oftentimes these companies are not super forward with where this data is coming from.
Yeah.
And like, it's not, at least as far as I know, it's not as big of an issue for someone like me who does physical paintings. But digital artists, that's like, there have been many cases of people coming out and saying like, hey, this AI generated image is exactly my art style, and I can recognize, as the person who made these original pieces, what elements were used to generate this new image. So that to me just feels like plagiarism.
Yeah.
And there are cases where it's more obvious than others, but then it's like, all right, well, if you use so much data that becomes impossible to distinguish the individual unique features of this artist from the thousands of others that were used to generate this image. And so I have an issue with that, for
Totally.
one thing. I have other issues, but maybe
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, on that, just to begin, one thing that I've really been thinking about a lot is like the value of created things and the type of content that I want to be generating. I want it to be generative. Um, and I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was talking about how so much of what we see online now is regurgitated reactions or a reporting back of this story or a reaction to a reaction to a reaction.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about that, and I was like, sure, I've done that a few times, but I think when I do that style of content, I try my best to utilize it as inspiration to then within me generate something new that I am creating, even if it is just a reaction. I don't want to sit down and just read an article that someone else wrote and then say, and what do you think, audience? And then move on. But we see that all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I think there is such a difference in like the integrity of creation when your personal point of view is embedded into the thing that you're creating, or some essence of you is being added. There's something
Yeah.
additive and generative about it passing through you as opposed to you just being a middleman or a window. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, no, you kind of need to be like a stained glass window. You need to add at least something if something is being reflected through you.
Yeah, that's
And
nice. That's a good analogy for it.
thank you. But it's interesting because the thing that came up for me as you were talking was there are some people that do create, like, I think in terms of like generated visual art, maybe it's a little bit different, but to continue this analogy between like humans and AI, there are human beings who create basically things that are like the AI generated image of
Yeah.
content, you
Yeah,
know?
all the
And
like what I don't know how to pronounce don't come for me, artists, I'm sorry. But let me use a different example so people
okay.
don't come for me in the comments. But like I've talked about this before, people who do master copies.
Yeah.
And there are lots of Instagram accounts of people who do that. And obviously being able to replicate almost an identical copy of the girl with the pearl earring and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, or like the Mona Lisa. That's impressive and that takes technical skill, but to me that's not art
Right.
because it's just a recreation of an original.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And so in that sense, I very much am like, I don't want to just be doing that. And I think we see like lots of podcasts that are just like regurgitating other information or YouTube channels that are just reactions or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and there's a difference between like adding commentary and creating a dialogue around something or like creating a video essay out of a larger conversation, even though it's grounded in some of these like reactionary or like reiterative things. But is it truly like how far are we comfortable with something being derivative going? And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's interesting that we give human beings a certain pass for being replicatory, if that's a
Mm.
word. Whereas when it's an AI doing it, it's like, well, that's really bad. And I'm like, I think it's also bad if humans are doing that personally, like
Yeah.
in like quote unquote bad. It's like obviously giving credit, as long as you're giving credit and being open and ethical with how you do that, maybe I wouldn't say bad. Maybe I would just say like not true art or not artistically integrous. But if you're not even doing that, I'm like, I would say unethical. But it's
Yeah.
interesting that it's like there are things that AI can do that human beings themselves do that I think is just as problematic. And AI, I think, just pinpoints why it is so disheartening and uncomfortable for us,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, this machine isn't adding anything to the process. They're just coalescing all of these things, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I do, for one thing, I don't think people really have that strong of a distinction between like it's fine when people do it and bad when AI
Mm,
does it, because even like in my opinion, as someone who's generally critical of AI generated images as art, is the question of like how much, like, AI at the end of the day is a tool. So just because somebody used AI in the process of their artwork doesn't automatically entail that it is not an original piece of art or that
yeah.
it is plagiarism, because like there's one case that I was reading about of a painting that won like an art fair in Colorado in 2022, and there the judges said like even if we knew initially that it was AI generated, we would still have given it the first prize. But they didn't know going into it. And then they found out and they're like, well, just the painting in and of itself, judging based on how it looks, like we would have given it the first prize. But then I found out just before we started recording that the artist of that piece has tried multiple times to submit a copyright, like to copyright this image. But currently, at least in the US, the copyright office or whatever it's called, like they don't give out, you can't copyright AI generated material.
Mm,
And the artist was saying like, oh well, I put it through this thing and then I did like iterative versions of it,
right.
over 600 changes, and I put it in this other software and I made these really detailed modifications. So it's like, should we judge a piece as more original as
Right.
there's like a greater amount of human intervention? And then there are also pieces like there are pieces where like artists will use AI generated content as a way to call into question um the ethics of it, or as a way to
Yeah.
call our attention to how blurred the line between human art and AI generated content can be. So it starts a conversation in virtue of it being the sort of thing that
Right.
just based on the thing itself we would normally automatically criticize as being like not very original. So it's a very nuanced situation,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm flat out like AI art is bad. I
Yeah.
think
Well,
AI generated images, like, again, I don't have, my opinion on this is not settled, but at this moment in time I can say that AI generated images with like barely any human intervention, and even like a small amount of human intervention, I feel like is not original.
yeah. Well, and I
I don't
think
know.
no, I think that I like the phrasing of human intervention. And in what I was saying, I think that was kind of what I was getting at, was like there needs to be a certain amount of intervention for this to be generative and new. Um, but then of course there's the argument of like there's nothing new under the sun, but it's like also we create new things all the time through um like combinations and inspiration and interventions and changes and all of the different things. And I would argue, like, is anything truly replicated, right? Like the you never step into the same river twice of it all. Um and in some ways I think both are probably true in some sense, but I absolutely hear what you're saying. And I like the distinction you made too of like just AI being used doesn't make it automatically bad or bad art or not art. Um, but it's how you use the tool in the in the midst of the process and in engaging with it. And I do think sometimes I also have a certain level of like, what kind of human intervention is there? You know, like how much of yourself are you putting into it versus like, I don't know. I can't think of a good example for that, but like intervention just in like making changes versus like some sort of like internal process happening with something. I don't know, an engagement with it, but I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I think that that distinction is an important one to make, and the clarification of also I agree. I think even though I said earlier, you know, sometimes we give humans a pass for doing replicatory things, but AI we don't. And you were like, well, I actually don't know if that's true. And it's like, no, you're right. Like there people who do that online certainly are given crap. And even though plenty of people that just create AI things are looked down upon, that doesn't mean they don't make a living off of it, but that doesn't mean that they're viewed as people or artists or creators of integrity for sure. And I think different people have different levels of problem with that, right? Because some people are
Yeah.
like, who cares? Who gives a shit? Like if it's entertaining, like get your bag. And then other people that I think probably more like us that are like, well, we need to be thinking about the implications of all of these things. But you said there's some other aspects of AI art too that you have issues with. I'd be curious, anything else that's really big for you?
Oh, I mean, well, definitely the ethical concern and then the human implication thing is less a problem that I have with it and more just one point of sort of like an important point to take into account, you know? And I'm not really sure how I feel about that yet. And at the same time, it's like, should we really be giving human intentionality the highest seat, the most distinguished
Right.
place at the table of things that make something art? Like, should we be taking these technologies and saying like, okay, well maybe AI is going to radicalize the art world in the same way that the introduction of the camera did, where like before people were mostly doing representational art depicting important figures and historical happenings or mythological stories, and then suddenly we have all these different creative, modalities because we don't need to just use art to represent things. And maybe AI will do something like that too, like, oh, now art
Yeah.
is not from just one subjective point of view of the artist, but it's a sort of like collective agency, a sort of collective artistic
Yeah.
creation that, maybe it's sort of like the medium for that more collective agency is a singular person who like makes the AI artwork, but maybe it's going to be something different. So like there are different ways to look at this, and I don't want it to just sound like I have
Totally.
like a reactionary like negative take on it.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
yeah.
I'll own very clearly, like, my gut reaction is no, bad, scared. But I
Yeah, me too.
think that that's a really wise point, and something that I continually try and remind myself is like, don't be such a Luddite. And like I mean, I think I've said this before probably, but a hammer can be used to build a house. It can also be used to bash someone's head in, right? Like a tool is a tool. You can use it for really beautiful things or really harmful things. And with everything, it goes back to kind of what you said earlier, like we need to think how we're engaging with it. And regardless of your conclusions on what this thing is, if we're engaging with anything in a significant way, think about it intentionally and try and do so ethically. Um, and like give credit to artists. Like also
Yeah.
that, but I think that that's a really good point just to, and even echoing what you said earlier, that it's like, in your opinion isn't settled on this. And I'll say that too, that it's like, even though my gut reaction is, I think, a negative one, I'll own that that is fear-based, but also rooted in like wanting to see more artistic integrity out there. And I think that right now what we're seeing with AI is really scary.
Yeah.
But there is such potential for so many great things to come of this. And if humans can figure out how to harness something for good, like everything is energy at the end of the day. And if we can use this energy in a productive, generative way, then it's another tool, not necessarily something to fear, but
Yeah.
maybe the
But-
only thing to fear are humans themselves.
Yeah. But again, we could be optimistic about it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, let's take a look at the companies who are creating these systems. And
Well,
then it becomes a
who's
little
in
bit harder to
charge.
be optimistic.
Yeah. Well, and the power structures that it exists within. And I think that very much is part of the fear that, like, any sort of big corporation that stands to make money from something is going to try to make money from it.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, for closing thoughts on academic institutions and AI and structures around art, I guess I'll just throw out there, go make something today, y'all. Like, even if it's a, I don't know, like cootie catcher or origami, little swan or a really nice cup of coffee. Like, go make something just for you that's fun. Remind yourself that you are a creator, that you are an artist, and tap into that and remind yourself that, like, you are this artist. Any closing thoughts from you, Lauren?
No, that sounds pretty good to me. I won't be doing any of that after this. I'll be continuing to write about but I mean no, I mean, this is why I wanted to write about it in the first place, because there are aspects of it that are quite interesting, but
Yeah.
basically
and
trying to
even-
force these issues that are very close to home and just very relevant into like institutionalized philosophy. I don't think that should be as difficult as it is sometimes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that there's like a hierarchy of like, oh, this is like highbrow philosophy and this is lowbrow philosophy and stuff like that. And I don't know. That's not optimistic. Let's close on your optimistic point.
That's so funny. No,
Go make a cootie catcher, everyone.
Go make a cootie catcher. But also, I'm like, no, I think that's an important point too. That, like, this final point of, like, pay attention to who's in charge and who's in control and the power structures. Like, that is kind of the uniting thread between, like, institutionalized philosophy and academic structures and AI and the corporatization and commodification of art. It's like, be mindful of how we participate in these systems across the board, across industries, and the way to take back your power is to go make a cootie catcher.
That's right. That's what it's all about. That's a great
at the
through
end
line.
of the day.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about.
Well, Lauren, thank you for sharing. Maybe in the future, if you end up wanting to share this paper, we could do another episode about another one of your papers, or listeners, if you're interested in it, let us know. And thank you. You're welcome. Hello.
You're welcome. Yes. And it's not a Sunday.
It's not a Sunday.
It's not a Sunday.
It's not a Sunday.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. The Unwritten Aesthetic is a bi-weekly podcast from the Cohere Collective that features philosophical artist or artistic philosopher Lauren Bush and question asker and meaning maker Reese Brown. Please subscribe to The Unwritten Aesthetic wherever you may be listening, and if you enjoyed the episode, consider leaving us a like, a 5-star rating, and or a review. And sharing the episode is a really wonderful way to kickstart meaningful conversations in your own life. If you want to stay up to date on all things The Unwritten Aesthetic, you can follow the Cohere Collective on any social media platform at the Cohere Collective, and check out our other content and offerings at thecoherecollective.com. To explore Lauren's work, head to laurenbushpaints.com and follow her on Instagram and YouTube at laurenbushpaints. If you're interested in working with Reese to find and pursue your purpose, head to thecoherecollective.com to explore life coaching options. A huge thank you to Jack Corbett for the Unwritten Aesthetics music, and thank you all for being here today and exploring the Unwritten Aesthetic with us. As always, we hope you feel like you are living more coherently. Until next time, love.